So I was just downstairs in my living room taking a little break. I had to kind of cut off for the night, and you can see I'm like not even wearing like a proper shirt. I'm wearing like a cut off t-shirt because I was just relaxing, sitting back, watching some YouTube, and watched Tim Pool's story about this woman, April Glaser, who he apparently is in a little bit of a feud with. He says she's an activist and she says she's not, and I'm not going to rehash that feud because I don't really care. But what he was talking about, I thought was pretty interesting from a completely different perspective, and so I had to scurry right back up to my office and turn on my computer and talk about it immediately, because I frankly think that both Tim and April have missed a larger point to this whole thing. And that makes sense because they're journalists. Well, he's a journalist. I don't know what the hell she is. But that makes sense because they don't live in the world I live in every day. And I have a different perspective on this story about Google cutting back their diversity and inclusion program. But before we get into that, let's just make sure we know what we're talking about. So April Glaser has done a couple stories about Google basically rolling back this diversity and inclusion program. Google has significantly rolled back diversity and inclusion initiatives in an apparent effort to avoid being perceived as anti-conservative, according to 8 current and former employees. Since 2018, internal diversity and inclusion training programs have been scaled back or cut entirely for Google employees, and 2 people who recently left the company told NBC News in interviews. In addition, they said the team responsible for those programs has been reduced in size, and positions previously held by full-time employees have been outsourced or not refilled as members of the diversity team left the company. So Tim's purpose in covering this was basically to call the author of this story an activist and pointing out that she's done this type of like SJW nonsense work before and all that. And that's a point well taken. But from my perspective, I'm actually much more interested in the content of these diversity and inclusion programs, because though I am not prepared to say that all diversity and inclusion programs are absolute crap, frankly, a lot of them are. A lot of them have no relevance to business success and productivity at all. Now, for those of you who don't know, I feel like I've said this a billion times, but for those of you who may be new to this video, I'm an organizational psychologist. In real life, that is what I do. I have a PhD in psychology. My focus is on industrial organizational psychology. When I'm not mouthing off on YouTube, I actually help organizations all over the world help create better working environments. And in the work that I do, and I'm going to be very careful not to say too much here, but I'm just going to go high level. I have worked with companies that do a lot of work with Google. I absolutely have some inside info about how Google operates. Again, I'm going to keep this very high level, but let me just say it's not good. It is not good. The companies that I have worked with that have, the employees that work closely with Google, oh my God, they do a number on these employees. It's really bad, folks. These employees are so stressed out, they're losing sleep, they're making themselves sick, and it's constant. And it is all because of their interactions with Google. This has been universal across every client I have had that has worked closely with Google. And so, you know what? I'm going to say that the diversity and inclusion programs, while they may be great, are probably not getting the job done in terms of actually creating a positive and productive workplace culture. But let's learn more before I really dismantle why this type of diversity and inclusion program does not work. One well-liked diversity training program at Google called Sojourn, a comprehensive racial justice program created for employees to learn about implicit bias and how to navigate conversations about race and inequality, was cut entirely, according to 7 former and current employees. 7 current and former employees, could they possibly use that line anymore? From across a range of teams and roles at the company said separately that they all believe the reason behind cutting Sojourn was taking employees off diversity projects to move them elsewhere at Google to shield the company from backlash from conservatives. Now, why would the company have backlash from conservatives? Is it because Google does not cultivate a place that really promotes diversity of thought and diversity of approach? Because statistically, half of the people at Google are conservatives. Just statistically, that's probably not true. I'm sure it's probably slanted very far right, very far left. Oh, God. But so it's probably slanted very far left, but still, there are absolutely people who work at Google that are probably more center. There are absolutely people who work at Google that are probably more right. Do those people feel like they can speak up? Do those people feel like they can contribute? Because here's the thing. Diversity of your skin color, of your gender, of your ethnic background, those things do not contribute in any way to building successful teams that actually get shit done. It doesn't. In fact, what we know, and this data comes from Google, motherfuckers. Probably shouldn't have said that. It's late at night, man. This data comes from Google. We know that the #1 attribute of a high-performing team from Google's own data is psychological safety. That is team trust. It's all about trust. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't base whether or not I trust someone on the color of their skin or their gender. I base it on my working relationship. I base it on them having integrity. I base it on them doing what they say they're going to do. Now, some people might base it on skin color. I don't know. Maybe a lot of people at Google do. I don't tend to do that, and I don't think the normal people do that either. But I'm getting off track. So this is a very long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Just a couple more phrases. The reduction in Google's diversity work comes at a time when the employment in the tech industry, and at Google in particular, is overwhelmingly dominated by white and Asian men. Again, that is not a factor when you're looking at how to build high-performing and resilient teams. A key way tech companies have sought to retain employees from diverse backgrounds is by conducting company-wide training programs on how to detect and counteract prejudice in the workplace. That's not going to retain employees. Employee retention is a combination of 3 different factors. 1, overall compensation in relation to what the market value is for your position. 2, job satisfaction. How happy are you working at the company? 3, career progression. Is your job taking you in the direction that you want to go? Now, admittedly, if you don't feel like you fit in a company because you've got a lot of people who don't look like you, well, yeah, your job, that's going to take a hit to your job satisfaction. However, if your career is going in the way you want it to go in and you feel like this job is a stepping stone to get you to where you want to go and your compensation is really, really, really good, then it's not going to matter as much. You're going to retain at the company, probably, most 90% of the time. This is just saying, like, this is about racial and gender breakdown. So when Google, I'm showing you this essentially to show that when Google says diversity, what they mean are immutable characteristics, but those things are not the things that actually contribute to workplace performance and productivity and morale and that sort of thing. Now, this became a story today because like 10 members from the damn House sent a memo to Google saying, what about these diversity programs? And basically they're saying, you know, the tech sector has become one of the most important drivers of America's economy and our global culture, and so many innovative aspects of Google have been cultural pace setters that have led the way. Not only do you offer products and services that respond to everyday needs of our communities, you offer high-paying jobs that help steer the course of our domestic economy. So they're inquiring about what. Why are you getting rid of these diversity programs when we rely on you, Google, when we rely on you? Well, let's talk about what type of diversity Google should actually be worried about in the real world. So this is the DISC model. This is the model that I use when I'm working with organizations to help build diverse, truly diverse teams. And there are a lot of different models out there. This is the one I like the best because I find it to be the absolute easiest one to teach and implement and apply in the workplace. And it also happens to be freakishly accurate when it's assessed well. So DISC basically says there are 4 different types of primary work styles. You get your Ds, your dominant people, your people with like the most natural leadership characteristics. You have your Is, those are your people, your influencers. You have your S's, which is your steadiness profile. These are kind of like your office moms and office dads and office therapists, if you will. They're the people that take care of everyone else. And then you have your C's, which are your conscientious people, your very data-driven people. I guarantee you, most people at Google right now have a lot of C in them. Now, you might say, Carlin, this is only 4 categories. People can't possibly be split into 4 categories, and you'd be right. Because every single person is a combination of each of these 4. And then it's like you think of it like, the tools you use in your toolbox. You know, you can use a hammer, you can use a screwdriver, you can use a saw, you can use whatever the hell else is in a toolbox. I don't really know. That's my husband's job. That's man's work. But maybe of all the tools in your toolbox, you use the hammer the most, and you use the screwdriver the second most. It's not to say you can't use any of the other tools in your toolbox. It's just that you tend not to use them as much. Same is true of the disc model. So every single person is going to be at least one of these styles. Some people are very, very dominant into one styles. Most people are going to be a combination of two primary styles, but there are all sorts of different combinations. I mean, it's really an infinite number of combinations. Here's the point I want to make. The real diversity that matters on any single team, is not skin color or gender or any immutable characteristic. It is the diversity of approach, diversity of thought, the diversity of work style, however you want to frame it. I tend to say diversity of approach because each of these different work styles is going to approach problems in different ways. And when you have teams that are all made up of one or two work styles, it causes so many problems on the team in terms of productivity. Now, you know what doesn't affect what work style you are? Color of your skin, gender. Your education doesn't affect it. It can to a certain extent, but really it doesn't affect it. The year you were born doesn't affect it. This is all about, it's like part nature, part nurture. We kind of think now is, people are born with some characteristics, but then they also develop tendencies over the course of their lives. Your profile can change over time. It's just not likely to change very much. But listen, so the big thing that most teams should be worried about in terms of diversity is making sure they have a good diverse set of styles on their team, because in any sort of like organic social group that people come together kind of randomly, what's going to happen is you're going to have an even distribution of these work styles. So in the United States, if I had everyone in the United States take this particular assessment, you're going to have 25% D, 25% I, 25% S, 25% C as their primary work style. That's a good diverse group. But some organizations, because of their hiring practices and because they look for fit on team culture, they tend to hire a lot of one style. I was working with a very, very large hospital system a couple months back when we were still able to have in-person retreats. And what we found is that 80% of the people on the team were this I style. 80% of the people on the team. It was causing so many problems because the team did not have diversity of thought. Now, if you looked at their skin color, yeah, super diverse team. If you looked at their genders, yes, very diverse team. If you looked at their backgrounds, yes, very diverse team. All the immutable characteristics were diverse, diverse, diverse. 80% of them were one work style, and that caused a lot of problems. And so we had to put strategies in place to mitigate that. Now, let's look at a different perspective here, and I want to look at, where is it? There it is. I want to look at the dimensions that we look at when we're assessing hyper-resilient teams. Now, I told you, based on Google's own data at the very get, that the most resilient teams are going to have a very high degree of psychological safety. That's about team connection. That's about trust. So that absolutely is a factor in the resiliency of the teams they're building at Google. And I'll tell you, of all the different dimensions that lead to a high-performing, highly resilient team, the one that the diversity and inclusion programs at Google are actually going to impact is probably going to be that team connection. So yes, the programs around racial equality, social justice, that sort of stuff is going to probably help team connection. It's also probably going to help team attitude. So that's one of our dimensions as well that we're looking at when we are looking for highly resilient teams. However, you know what it's not going to help? It's not going to help team direction, which is actually the number one most important thing that I look at, which is essentially, does the team have the same goal? Do they all know what they're doing? Are they all on the same page? It's probably not going to help team alignment, and it's also probably not going to help team performance, which is really more about process. So when we're looking at the diversity programs that Google has in place, they are only going to really, really, really impact this team connection and probably impact team attitude. And certainly, they're not going to impact this. Google is not looking at a diverse set of perspectives on the team. That is not their highest priority. And this, at the end of the day, is actually going to be the number one thing that is going to drive what the teams at Google are going to be able to achieve. So, I'll just round this out by saying that I don't necessarily think diversity and inclusion programs are bad. I think they're misguided, and I think that they don't, if we're talking about what is going to make Google as successful as it can be to serve society and the tools we're all using and those sorts of things, I mean, they're fine, but does it deserve a goddamn congressional investigation over why they're cutting their diversity and inclusion programs? And it doesn't even look like they're cutting them. It looks like they're just outsourcing them, which is probably a much better way to go about it anyway. Outsourcing programs for any company is almost always the right thing to do. It makes them much more scalable, and if you're actually going to invest in things, that's usually the much better way to go about it rather than developing them internally. So I guess all this is to say is this is like much ado about nothing. This article could just as well be titled Google drastically rolling back programs that don't impact team performance. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. And reporters like this social justice woman, April, they like to make big hay out of these things. But when people like me who actually do this crap in the real world look at these programs and look at the effectiveness of these programs, there's just not there. And I'll tell you what, man, if I were Google, I would be much more worried about the climate and the culture you're creating at that company, because you're creating a lot of really stressed out people who are treating your vendors and your partners very, very badly. And I know that because I've had to fix some of those people, and it is very difficult. They come out traumatized by working at Google. So that would be the thing that I would focus on, but what do I know? I'm just a woman screaming on the internet. I don't know. Yeah, take it for what it's worth. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.